Berlin, October 1961. A British Army Ferret scout car sits at Checkpoint Charlie, engine idling quietly as Soviet T-54 tanks face off against American M-48 Pattons just yards away. The tiny four-wheeled vehicle looks absurdly fragile compared to the 40-ton tanks surrounding it, but its crew remains calm. The Ferret's mission isn't fighting Soviet armor. It's watching, reporting, and if necessary, escaping at 58 miles per hour before those tank guns can traverse. The commander scans Soviet positions through binoculars, radio operator transmitting updates to headquarters. This is what the Ferret was designed for: reconnaissance in the shadow of nuclear war, inheriting the mission and mechanical DNA of its famous parent, the Daimler Armoured Car, but evolved for a world where the next war might end civilization. What that Ferret crew represented was Britain's solution to Cold War reconnaissance: a vehicle small enough to hide, fast enough to run, and sophisticated enough to gather intelligence in the most dangerous places on Earth. Between 1952 and 1971, Britain built over 4,400 Ferrets. They served everywhere British forces went, from the Berlin Wall to Borneo jungles, from Aden streets to Northern Ireland roads. The Ferret was the child of the elegant Daimler Armoured Car, inheriting its parents' mechanical refinement and reconnaissance philosophy, but adapted for conflicts where stealth mattered more than firepower. The problem facing Britain in the late 1940s was recognizing that World War II's lessons needed updating for Cold War reality. The Daimler Armoured Car had been superb, but it was designed for 1930s warfare. The new threat was Soviet armored divisions in Germany, communist insurgents in Malaya, and nationalist movements across the dissolving empire. Britain needed reconnaissance vehicles that could operate in both scenarios: high-intensity warfare in Europe and low-intensity colonial conflicts. The vehicle had to be smaller than the Daimler for better concealment, faster for escaping superior forces, mechanically reliable for extended operations without support, and cheap enough to produce in quantity during peacetime austerity. Existing vehicles were inadequate for evolving requirements. The Daimler Armoured Car remained excellent but was too large and too expensive for peacetime production. The Daimler Dingo Scout Car from World War II was too small and lightly protected. The newly introduced Saladin Armoured Car was powerful but too heavy for certain reconnaissance roles. What British reconnaissance units needed was something between the Dingo and Daimler: large enough for effective reconnaissance, small enough for concealment, and sophisticated enough to incorporate lessons from recent combat. The designer was Daimler again, the same company that created the elegant Daimler Armoured Car. The engineering team at Daimler's Radford Works understood reconnaissance vehicle requirements intimately, having designed both the wartime Dingo Scout Car and the larger Armored Car. They approached the new requirement with the same philosophy: automotive sophistication applied to military needs. The result would be designated the Ferret, a name suggesting speed, agility, and the ability to go where larger predators couldn't. Development began in 1949 with prototypes tested extensively in British and tropical conditions. The design emphasized mechanical reliability through proven components and simple construction. The hull used welded steel armor with a low profile just 6 feet 2 inches tall, making it easy to conceal in terrain. The four-wheel drive configuration provided excellent mobility, with all wheels both driven and steered, giving a remarkably tight turning circle. The engine was a Rolls-Royce B60 Mark 6A 6-cylinder petrol engine producing 129 horsepower, overpowered for the vehicle's light weight. The initial armament on the Mark I was purely defensive: a single-point .303 Bren-Light machine gun on a pintle mount. This reflected the Ferret's designed role as a scout, not a fighting vehicle. Later Marks added turrets. The Mark II featured a small open-topped turret with a .30 caliber Browning machine gun. The Mark IV mounted a .50 caliber Browning in an enclosed turret. The Mark V added swiveling launchers for vigilant anti-tank guided missiles, transforming the Scout car into an anti-armor platform. Physical specifications revealed a compact, purposeful vehicle. Overall length was 12 feet 7 inches. Height was just 6 feet 2 inches, lower than a standing man. Width was 6 feet 3 inches. Combat weight was 4.4 tons for the Mark I, increasing to 5.5 tons for the Mark IV with the heavier turret. Maximum road speed reached 58 miles per hour, exceptional for an armored vehicle. Range was approximately 190 miles on roads. The armor was 16 millimeters maximum, adequate against small arms and shell fragments, but useless against anti-tank weapons. The crew was 2 on the Mark I, driver and commander. Mark II and later versions added a 3rd crew member as turret gunner. The fighting compartment was extremely cramped, with crews describing it as claustrophobic during extended operations. But the small size was intentional, making the Ferret difficult to spot and easy to conceal. Revolutionary aspects inherited from the Daimler included the pre-selector gearbox on early models, allowing smooth gear changes and instant forward to reverse transitions. Later Marks switched to conventional gearboxes for simplicity and cost reduction. The Rolls-Royce engine provided smooth, quiet operation, reminiscent of the Daimler's refined power plant. The 4-wheel steering, unique among military vehicles, gave extraordinary maneuverability in tight spaces. Production began in 1952 at Daimler's Radford facility. The British Army ordered 1,838 vehicles initially, with production continuing through 1971. Various marks were produced addressing different requirements. The Mark I was the basic Scout car. Mark II added the small turret. Mark III was a signals vehicle variant. Mark IV featured the improved turret and became the most common version. Mark V was the anti-tank missile carrier. Export orders significantly exceeded British procurement, with over 4,400 Ferrets produced total for operators worldwide. First combat use came in Malaya during the emergency from 1948 to 1960. Ferrets replaced older Scout cars, providing better protection against ambushes on jungle roads. The speed allowed rapid reaction to insurgent sightings. The small size permitted movement through narrow jungle tracks where larger vehicles couldn't go. The mechanical reliability meant Ferrets could operate for weeks in harsh tropical conditions without major maintenance. The defining conflict was Aden from 1963 to 1967. British forces used Ferrets extensively for urban patrol and reconnaissance. The vehicle's small size allowed navigation through narrow streets. The armor protected crews from small arms and grenades during ambushes. The speed enabled rapid extraction from contact. Ferrets became symbols of British presence, conducting daily patrols through hostile districts where larger vehicles drew more attention and attacks. Northern Ireland from 1969 onward saw probably the most extensive Ferret service. Thousands of patrols conducted over 3 decades employed Ferrets for reconnaissance and convoy escort. The vehicles proved ideal for the confined roads and urban environment. The visibility from the turret allowed commanders to observe surrounding areas. The armor provided reasonable protection against rifles and petrol bombs, though proved vulnerable to IRA armor-piercing rounds and later improvised explosives. Export users saw combat worldwide. Indonesia used Ferrets during confrontations with Malaysia. South Africa employed them during the border war. Portuguese forces used Ferrets in African colonial wars. Middle Eastern nations, including Jordan, Lebanon, and Kuwait, operated Ferrets with Kuwaiti vehicles facing Iraqi forces in 1990. For comparison, the Soviet BRDM-1 and BRDM-2 served similar reconnaissance roles. The BRDM-2 was larger, heavier, and amphibious, but less mechanically refined. American forces used the M8 Greyhound and later M114 command and reconnaissance vehicle, both larger than the Ferret. The French Panhard AML was similarly sized but more heavily armed. The Ferret occupied a unique niche, smaller and stealthier than most contemporary reconnaissance vehicles, sacrificing firepower for concealment. But crews experienced significant limitations. The light armament meant Ferrets couldn't fight effectively if ambushed. The thin armor was penetrated easily by any anti-tank weapon and even heavy machine guns at close range. The cramped interior caused severe fatigue during extended operations. In Northern Ireland, crews spent 12-hour shifts inside Ferrets, barely larger than a compact car. The lack of NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical, protection on early marks was concerning given Cold War fears. The petrol engine created fire hazards when hit. The open-topped turret on Mark II variants left the commander exposed to grenades and snipers. Maintenance in extreme climates was challenging despite the Rolls-Royce engine's general reliability. Spare parts became scarce as the vehicle aged, particularly after production ended in 1971. One veteran described it. The Ferret was brilliant at what it was designed for, sneaking around, watching, reporting, and buggering off quickly when spotted. But God help you if you got into a real fight. You had a machine gun against anything from RPGs to tanks. Your only real defense was not being there when the shooting started. British Army retirement began in the 1980s as the CVRT family of tracked reconnaissance vehicles replaced Ferrets. By the early 1990s, most were withdrawn except for some training use. Export operators continued using Ferrets much longer. Some African and Asian nations operated Ferrets into the 2000s, testament to the vehicle's robust construction and mechanical simplicity. Surviving examples are common in military vehicle collections. The Ferret's small size and relatively simple mechanics make it popular with private collectors. Restored examples range from 8,000 pounds to 25,000 pounds, depending on variant and condition. Running Ferrets appear frequently at military vehicle rallies across Britain and Europe. The legacy influenced British light armored vehicle development. The Fox armored car and Scimitar reconnaissance vehicle that replaced Ferrets retained the philosophy of speed and stealth over heavy armament. Modern British doctrine still emphasizes reconnaissance vehicles using mobility and concealment rather than fighting power. Berlin, October 1961. The Ferret remains at Checkpoint Charlie as the tank standoff continues. Its crew watches, records, reports. When tensions ease and tanks withdraw, the Ferret drives quietly away. Mission accomplished without firing a shot. The Ferret scout car proved what its Daimler parentage established. Reconnaissance is about gathering information and surviving, not fighting. The child inherited its parents' mechanical refinement and reconnaissance philosophy, adapted for a world where conflicts ranged from nuclear standoffs to colonial insurgencies. Not the most powerful vehicle, not the most protected, but for 40 years the right vehicle for watching the world's most dangerous places and living to report what it saw. The Cold War child of Britain's greatest World War II armored car, carrying forward the family tradition of elegance, refinement,